Give him a round of applause.
Thanks, guys. My name is JD Reeves. I am currently a art director at Ghost. But I didn't do this at Ghost. I did this as my MFA thesis project at University of Oklahoma, this book. So I went to school for 3 years. You would say, why would you go get your MFA in design? Because I felt like my work before then was really superficial. I felt like I was missing kind of a conceptual side of my work. And I really felt like I needed a little more formal training, honestly. And also, I wanted to have the option to teach in the future. So I went to OU, got my MFA. And the cool thing about grad school is that you can work on a project like this for a year and a half, and you can try a lot of things, and you can fail a lot of times, and then the clients aren't getting mad at you because no one's footing the bill for all those failures and experiments. So that's one thing that was really cool, is basically a year and a half working on this. Well, this was part of a larger project too, but the majority of the research and work ended up manifesting itself in this particular piece. It's a 132-page book. Another cool thing about grad school, I don't know if this is everywhere, but at OU, you kind of get to pick what you work on. I mean, you have to write a proposal and get approved. But so growing up, I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma, very rural area. My parents had land, nothing crazy. We had like 16 acres, but I spent a lot of time outside. And then obviously since then, I've lived in more like urban environments since I moved from there and went to school. We lived in Madrid, Spain for a year, right before I came back to OU. And so I was kind of just thinking through my life, and I wanted to make some work that was like authentic and like true to me and true to my upbringing and something that I kind of knew about firsthand. And so I started thinking about sort of this idea of like rural and urban tension and the way that that manifests itself in the landscape, visually, economically, socially, all the above. And so, like I say, it was part of a larger project about land, the way we use land. But this particular idea I came up on early as I began researching. I came up on this quote, which is, nature serves as a source of energy, almost always invisible and impalpable. It is nature which provides us with health and vigor and peace of mind. It really rang true to me. I just thought about my childhood and how just being outside, I could like process things, and I just, I feel like spending time outdoors is really important. And I feel like the way a lot of time we use land is more like economically driven, more about profit and numbers than about actually like preservation and you know what I mean. So so I came across this quote and I started to think, okay, if nature is a source of energy for us, then like where's the wellspring of that? You know, where is this? Where is it most plentiful, most pure, and most readily available for our like consumption? If it's this source of energy, and the logic would follow that it would be like remote and secluded places, the places with the least influence from man and technology, dark, quiet, sometimes inconvenient places. Are kind of the places that he's talking about here, which this led me to the idea of the anti-destination. So anti-destination, let's see, came up with this definition: remote and secluded place with the least influence from man and technology, in which nature is the most pure, most plentiful, and most readily available. And so I began thinking about that idea, and my first, it's really hard when you're doing stuff like this to begin like manifesting that research into actual like design. That's sort of the challenge, right? You like read all these books and you're like, okay, I got a grasp on this research, but then like how do you go make something? And that's where I always kind of hit a wall. But with this concept, I thought, okay, it would be cool to have an app that sort of does the opposite of what our maps usually do. Like usually our maps are guiding us to like bars, restaurants, movie theaters, places with a lot of light, a lot of sound, a lot of people. What if they guided us to the middle of nowhere? And what would that what would that do for us? What would that make us think about, and how would that affect us? And I thought that was an interesting conversation to start to think about. So I started actually designing screens for the app, and I presented it to my committee at school, and they're like, so you're wanting people to go where, like literally one of the apps is least connected in terms of cell service. So you're wanting people to go to these like least connected places using an app on their phone. It's not going to work. And so it's not that I set out to design a book. It's that it kind of came naturally from that. I was like, oh, if there's a little small 6x9 book that someone can kind of throw in their console of their car, or kind of carry in their bag or whatever, it can guide you to these places. Also, one thing, the name Atlas might be a little bit misleading. I got a little pushback on that from people because you might expect just a book full of maps, which it isn't. It has 7 maps in it, but it is a book about places. It's all about places. And so I felt comfortable defending it for that calling it an atlas, because ultimately it is about place. So obviously there's the cover, a little bit bigger than this for you to see. Here's the table of contents. First chapter sort of talks about that idea of nature as a resource, why it's important, health benefits, mental benefits, spending time outside. Second chapter is about light pollution, which is like something crazy that I experienced growing up, is that I was actually in college, and I brought my college friends back to my parents' house, and they got out of the car and were all just like, oh my gosh, I've never seen the stars like this. And I was like, this is how I grew up. Every single day I could see the Milky Way, you know? So I was sort of thinking through that, and also just thinking through like bigger picture, how that affects people, having this like connection, like this like cosmic connection, and thinking about things bigger than you. Then noise pollution, air pollution, urban sprawl. Don't have time to like go into all of those, but you know what those are probably. And then the last chapter just kind of specifically goes through the regions of Oklahoma and talks about interesting elements of the natural landscape within each of those respective regions. So here's an example of what one of the map pages look like. So using data gathered from different sources, I was able to kind of mark on the map where in Oklahoma you can't experience the darkest night sky, and then on the opposite page talking about why you would ever even want to do that. For some people, you kind of have to tell them, like, this actually is important, it's kind of cool. And so that's what that page is. And then at the bottom there are like specific towns that are the darkest. And then of course throughout the course of my research, I came across people expressing these ideas better than I could. So I'm like, put some quotes in there because I can't say things that well. And so Wendell Berry was a big part of my research. And I really like this idea of like, to be able to like take care of the land. It's important that like we know it and we appreciate it. That's the whole purpose of the book. Is like ultimately you're wanting to have these conversations about like defending and advocating for the natural landscape. But if there's no appreciation for it, then no one cares. So this is talking about why it's important in the first place. This is something interesting I came across like towards the end of my research. The idea of this land ethic, which is like a theoretical framework for the way that we sort of relate to the land. So there's obviously like the way we relate to society here is like democracy, and the way we relate to others, there's a framework for that, like the 10 Commandments, the way we relate to like men and women around us. But for the land, there's not a lot. And so there's this idea of the land ethic establishes the way that both individuals and society at large relate to the land. And the land ethic it's pretty simple. It's just a thing is good when it serves to protect the like biotic community, and it is wrong when it tends otherwise. So it's pretty simple. You can run kind of everything through that filter. And then I thought it was important to go into specific places, specific towns, and talk about. So this is the darkest place in Oklahoma, and it talks about that there. This is actually one of my favorite pages of the book because it's like a visual representation of something that's typically not visual, it's sound. So I'm across the spread kind of contrasting waveforms of audio recorded in like a very rural, secluded area with like downtown Oklahoma City. And then this part I thought was cool. I don't know how many people are actually going to do it, but I like the idea of like, you should mark in this, you should go to these places. So I created this logbook, which allows you to like record coordinates, make notes about these places, mark it on a map, and sort of keep record of these places that you're actually visiting. And so just to like conclude, the point of the book was just to talk about these anti-destinations and like acquaint readers with areas that would typically be like blank spots on the map in hopes that they would like see value in them and be motivated to preserve and protect them. So that's the book. Does anyone have any questions? I have no idea how long that was. Yeah, so in 2010, I graduated from Oklahoma Baptist with a degree in design. And I always say now that like OBU's design program is pretty good, but when I went through it, we were the first class to go through it, and we were like guinea pigs, and I like didn't really learn anything. Sort of my senior year, I went to a show at OSU, and I was like, this is what a senior in college designer should be doing. I was like, oh my God, I thought this would be me in like 10 years. And so I really had to go back and like teach myself a lot of things to even be sort of like viable as a designer who gets paid to design. And that's another big reason why I felt like going back to school was important. I was like, I feel like I probably missed some things, and I'm going to be in some meeting someday, and they're like, why didn't you do this? And I'm like, no one ever taught me that. So I was like really insecure all the time, really like super like imposter syndrome all the time, like I don't know what I'm doing. So I just wanted to cover my bases in that. And so I applied to different schools, and I got funded at OU, and I was like, well, if I'm going to go to school for free and didn't really know what I was going to do anyway, we were living abroad, that's why I went back to school. And that's my education before. Yeah.
If you said you had one place that you just had to tell everybody, you have to go to this one place in Oklahoma, what would it be?
I'm supposed to repeat the questions, I just remembered. She asked if I had to tell everyone one place in Oklahoma, what would it be? It's actually, like southeastern Oklahoma is on almost like all of these maps, very quiet, a lot of trees, a lot of stars. But like growing up where I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma, I like think it's really beautiful. I think a lot of people have this idea of Oklahoma as just like plains, red dirt, like wide open, which it is. But a lot of people, when they get in northeastern Oklahoma, are like, wow, this landscape is totally different. And so just to me, that being where I'm from, I think it's a really like cool place to go and see something a little bit different. Yeah.
So with things like land, especially like outside of the rural land and nature, they're kind of like almost like intrusive archetypes of design, like expectations. And I think in a refreshing way, you kind of like address that. We talk about why you chose to do that, why you did away from those visual norms that people might expect from a book about nature.
Yeah, I mean, I originally explored it, and I was like, obviously going the direction of like the way things I think were tending to go, but this was also part of a larger project, and I sort of established kind of an overall visual language for that early on. And I actually struggled with that. Like this was the 13th redesign of this book, which I was in school, so I had time to do, but I wasn't really happy with it until I landed on this, and I just felt like I don't know, I felt like the high contrast and just adding in that little bit of red, which sort of hints at kind of the Oklahoma landscape, and even sort of makes me think of like Barnes, where I was growing up, sort of that like really like rusty color of red. I felt like, yeah, when like talking about nature, it could have gone a totally different way, but I just wanted it to be different. I wanted it to be about the information and not so much about sort of those like visual tropes that have to do with that. Yeah.
You start off saying that, some of the inspiration behind the book was you growing up in a northeast
Uh-huh.
So as you were designing this book, was there a moment when you kept going back to and say inspiration, or was how did that
Yeah, sort of the story that I told earlier about seeing. He asked if there was a moment that I kept going back to as I was designing this that I was thinking about from maybe previously in my life that I thought about as I was designing this. The story that I told about seeing the stars and just the contrast of like people who had never seen those. And a lot of the research I was doing is just like the night sky's disappearing. In 10 years, there's supposedly going to be 3 places in America that you can see the Milky Way. And I was just like, well, that's obviously not the most pressing environmental issue of our time, but like someone should maybe talk about that because, I don't know, people, I think all of us, me included, have our heads down a lot, very like self-centered. And so, I don't know, looking up, having some kind of connection with like the rest of humanity is a cool thing to talk about, I think. And just thinking about me as a kid coming home from school at the end of the day and just like sitting outside and like being very mindful and like practicing mindfulness as a kid and not even realizing it, but having nothing else to do because I was an only child sitting outside on our land. But then like seeing the benefits of that, stuff that I was thinking about as I was designing this. Yeah.
Seeing as this was a project in school, what was the process for getting it published?
Yeah.
For sale, and it, for instance, it's about a presentation where you find for how it's produced.
Yeah, he asked since it was a school project, what was the process of getting it published and selling it, and was I mindful of like, what did you say? Yeah, recycled paper. Yeah, so it was the first draft of it was 100% recycled. This is very important to me, obviously, because of the subject matter. And then when they like pulled it through the perfect binding, the recycled paper like couldn't hold up, and they called me 2 days before my thesis and were like, we can't do it. And I was like, what do you mean you can't do it? They're like, it's smearing really bad, we can't do it. And I was like, well, can you just change the paper? And they're like, oh yeah, we can do that, we'll have it to you. I was like, okay, well don't say you can't do it if you can do it. Freaking me out, I gotta present this in 2 days. So I did have to make some concessions on that, so the cover is not 100% recycled, the rest of it is. But to answer the first part of your question, I used a printer called SmartPress in Michigan because I was in school and it was super cheap. And I went on under consideration for print only and was like looking at like what has been featured on there. And I saw SmartPress and I was like, well, they can be on here and they're cheap, so it must be decent quality. I'll use them. So, but they were like super helpful with stuff like that. They're like just this batch that I just got, the spine was like crinkled up on them, and they just sent me new ones today, just full order, replace it. So, yeah, you can get it here tonight. I have some. They're $15, cash or Venmo. He asked where he could get the book. Keep forgetting to say the question. You can also order it at this website, the atlasofantidestinations.com, and I'll ship it to you. Yeah. He asked what the process to finish my master's was. So I had to do a thesis defense, which is basically a 20-minute talk, kind of similar to this, but I was presenting the whole project. So this was like one of like 9 or 10 components of the project. And then you're presenting it before the entire art faculty at OU. So when you have like a guy from ceramics and a guy from like technology, they just throw these questions at you and you're like terrified about what's going to happen. But that's what happened. I had to present it there, and then I had to write a thesis paper with that. I had an exhibition, sort of all of those things kind of combined. Yeah.
How would you say that doing this book has helped you in your work?
He asked how this book has helped me in my real work. So obviously, when you're working with a client, you don't have a year and a half on a lot of projects. But one way it has really helped me, and just grad school as a whole has really helped me, just about putting more work on like the front end of something and really like understanding your subject matter before you're like ever jumping on the computer. I'm like always embarrassed to admit, but I always say like every logo I used to do before going back to school, I jumped straight on Illustrator. And usually one of the first like 4 or 5 I did, I was like, not bad, send it to the client. And so going back to school, they were like, your work is really superficial. And I was like, ouch, but help me, because that's why I'm here. So they're like, sketch 300 logos before you ever even jump on the computer. And I was like, oh, okay. And so, yeah, grad school as a whole, and then this project specifically, just really like putting more emphasis on the concept side and really like having all those loose ends tied up before you're ever even making anything. And then it all comes together, and it comes together in a much stronger way than it would if you were just trying to make something right off the bat. Any other cues I can A? Yeah.
So how do you feel like an advanced degree has benefited you? Is it, in your career?
Mm-hmm.
Is it tangible, intangible, constant?
Yeah, he asked how having an advanced degree has benefited me in my career, and really just what I was saying just then. Just the way that I work, the way that I think, completely different from going to school for 3 years. Really, even just having a little bit more advanced level, like art history, really understanding like my place and just like the lineage of like making things. Really wanting to make like authentic work that's true to me, and just more thought and more understanding behind the work, I feel like has taken me to a level I wouldn't have gotten to on my own apart from school. Getting every 2 weeks presenting this and getting it completely torn apart, and having to not take that personally, just take it as like they want to help me make it better. I think I grew like thicker skin through that process. Honestly, a lot of the things that like our students at OU get in the undergrad that I didn't before, I had to go back and get.
Have you gotten anyone lost?
Have got anyone lost? Not that I know of. I'm sure it will happen though. As I think it's like talked about in here is like kind of the point of just like getting lost, finding your way out. You'll figure it out. I say in here, like, you might have to stop and ask for directions, which is what people used to do way back in the day. Anything else? Well, I just want to say thanks so much for letting me come here and talk. I really appreciate it. It was really fun. And if anyone is interested in a book or wants to talk anymore, back there. So thank you.